Hey there, I'm Dan Beer. This is Beer Home Team at eXp Realty, and I want to talk about what kind of loan terms you're getting on your loan. I'll share with you what I'm doing, which is very different from what most do. And I know that everyone's after that 30-year fix. I'm going to share with you why that may or may not make sense for you, and I want you to just carefully think through this, okay? So for me, I've always attained 10-year fixed terms on my loans. And the reason why is I'm aware of where I am in my stage of life with at first what was a new marriage, and then what was going to be our first kid and the second kid and third kid, and the second and third came at the same time. But I was aware of the fact when I bought that first townhome in Hillcrest with my wife, we were aware that we would probably not be there for 30 years. We probably wouldn't be there for 6. So why would we have gone to a 30-year fixed, which would raise our interest rate while reducing our purchasing power? There was no reason for us to do that. We knew that we would only be there for, say, 4 or 5 years. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. So we had a 10-year loan, 10-year fixed term on our loan on that property. We got what they call a 10-1 ARM. And of course, we sold and moved on to our next property. And the next property, here we again have a 10-1. This is something you have to get just clear on. The average American lives in their home. It was 7 years forever. Now it's 8. In Southern California, it's even less. And so I want you to think through, look, if you're really going into something you think, boy, I'm going to live in this just for about ever, you might consider that 30-year fixed. You still might consider a 10-1 that you then refinance, but that starts getting into riskier business, and I do want you to make an educated decision. But we're going to talk in a moment about what that blended rate might look like, so you also think through, well, what would the real rate be if that rate did reset? For most Americans, it had always been about 7 years. It's now moving to about 8, but still, then why are we all getting 30-year loans? Now, again, if you know you're going to be having children soon, or you're losing your children soon, they're going off, they're getting married, you're going to downsize, but you're buying a new home for the next 4, 5, 6 years, why do we need to be in a 10-year fix, which again reduces your purchasing power? So for me, if we look at rates today, and you can get a 30-year at about 3.75. I'm not quoting rates here, okay? This is just roughly speaking, lender I was just talking to, rough terms. So a 30-year fixed 3.75 versus a 10-year at 3.1. Well, I'm going to be very much attracted to that, knowing that at my stage in life, it's unlikely that I'm going to be in my property for 10 years. Even if I end up being in it for 10 years, it's very probable that, by years 5, 6, 7, I'm going to start thinking about, okay, look, it looks like we're here for longer. Let's refinance. I've refinanced my home already twice, and I've only been in it for 5 years, but as those rates drop, I just keep resetting these 10 years. So my 10 years have really extended to 14 at this point of having a lower interest rate than people that go for a 30-year fixed, because I'm watching the interest rate market and I do no cost, no fee refinances. So it doesn't cost me a thing. I reset my 10 years, I get a lower rate. And if you look at what it is to have 3.1, let's just close here, 3.1, right, times, let's just say 3.1 times 10, and then 1 year, if it were to reset and go up 2 points to 5.1, the blended rate, okay, of those 11 years is still a lot less than that 3.75. I hope that makes sense to you. It's hard to go into too much further detail here on this video, but I want you to think through the next time you're buying a house. Are you simply defaulting to a 10-year, are you simply defaulting to a 30-year fixed loan because that's just what people do? Or does that potentially maybe not make that much sense for you based on where you are with your life and where you see yourself going? I like 10 years. 5 year to me is just too short. You never really know what's going to change. 10 years long enough that if I decide to stay longer, I can refinance. If it looks like, I just don't see how I could ever get to that resetting period because I'm going to refinance, I'm going to sell, I have time to plan, and I have time for things to change. I also want to highlight something here as we're talking about refinances. Here's what interest rates have looked like over the course of time. So if we go back, and I don't have this in front of me, but I believe it's all the way back to the 60s. If we look back at interest rate peak and then when it dropped and then peaked again, and then when that cycle dropped and peaked again, and dropped and peaked again, and dropped and peaked, all the way literally to today. It's been about 50 years of this. That's the trend line you get. So yes, interest rates have been rising at different times in history over the last 50 years, but you get an overall downward cycle that's been lasting about 50 years. Now, that's no promise that that's going to continue to be the case. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know the future. But it's certainly something to take note of. And for me, 10 years, it's in reducing the amount of interest I have to pay, having more purchasing power, and being able to deploy those funds elsewhere if instead of into the pockets of the bank. For me, that makes sense. I hope I've given you something to think through. If you want to see a quote, not from me, but from a trusted lender that I've vetted out for great service, great rates, let me know. And the reason it matters to me is because if we're working together to buy a house, it is really helpful to know what your real purchasing power is versus what your purchasing power is minus higher rates that some people choose to pay the bank for not a very good reason. I'm Dan Beer here with the Beer Home Team at eXp Realty. Any way we can help you, or if we can answer any real estate questions, just let us know.